Paper water versus wet water. 3 miles from Walt's Field, a county clerk unlocked a metal drawer and slid out folders thick with signatures. Each one was a promise, an acre-foot with a date stamped on it. Senior, junior, the order mattered more than most people knew. On paper, this county had more water than it would see in a decade. Wet water didn't care. To understand the fight that was coming, you have to see how rights outran reality. The doctrine was simple: first in time, first in right. A ranch that filed in 1908 could keep irrigating alfalfa long after a subdivision with a 1998 right turned off its taps. People talked about priority like it was a character trait. It was survival. When flows dropped, cuts started at the bottom of the stack and climbed. Seniors slept. Juniors woke to shut off notices. But there was one problem baked into rules that sounded practical at first and cruel later. Use it or lose it. Conserve too much, and a neighbor could argue you didn't need that full amount. So ditches ran on cool days. Pivots swept corners that didn't need it. A farmer in Yuma, Arizona, joked he irrigated the county road to keep his right clean. He wasn't really joking. Meanwhile, municipal planners were selling tomorrow's houses with yesterday's water. A home builder flipped through glossy renderings, cul-de-sacs, pools, artificial lakes, and pointed at a line in a utility letter: assured water supply. What the line didn't say was that the city's portfolio leaned on junior rights. In a dry year, those rights were the first to go quiet. The concrete got poured anyway. For a long time, Lake Mead and Lake Powell made it all look fine. The big blue buffers evened out the noise. When the river ran low, the reservoirs leaned in. They were like savings accounts built on wet decades. Then withdrawals got bigger than deposits. Evaporation skimmed a hidden fee. The white ring at Mead rose like chalk marks in a kid's growth chart, each year taller, each year harder to ignore. Stakes right now: seniors would keep water while juniors watched faucets sputter. Entire tax bases, new schools, fire stations, bond-backed roads depended on rights that could vanish with a letter. A dairy with a 190s decree felt bulletproof. A distribution center with a 200s permit felt like it was standing on a trapdoor. When Mead crossed trigger lines, alarms didn't sound in living rooms. They went off in boardrooms. Shortage tiers kicked in, set by federal rules tied to reservoir elevations. For 2025, Lake Mead sat in a level 1 shortage condition, its January projection well below the 1,075-foot trigger, so Arizona and Nevada took the deepest cuts, while California leaned on senior rights and deal-making to spread the pain. Hydropower felt it too. Less head meant less force at the turbines. Electricity output sagged. Somebody's bill was going up. Microstory Phoenix. A city water manager in a windowless conference room spread maps on the table: blue for surface rights, brown for groundwater, red for risk. A subdivision on the city's edge had model results circled in black ink: insufficient groundwater. The Planning Commission voted to pause new plats. In a master-planned community, a model home went dark at noon for maintenance. The sales teams smiled harder. While those decisions landed, river lawyers sharpened pencils. Conservation districts signed emergency agreements to leave water in Mead and Powell, paid with federal drought funds. Farmers fallowed fields for cash, betting they could stay solvent by not planting. Cities paid to line canals, cover small reservoirs, and chase leaks with acoustic sensors. Every move bought time. Every move admitted the math. Then the hydropower memo hit. With turbines idled more often, utilities turned to gas. Peak demand met peak heat with less cheap power. Rates inched up. A family in Henderson asked why the electric bill jumped in September when the thermostat hadn't moved. The answer traced back to a reservoir's elevation line. Courts filled with filings. A water judge weighed snowpack curves against signatures older than the courthouse. He knew the law said paper first, river second. He also knew the river was saying no. He drafted an order that would make 10 people happy and 1,000 angry. Unknown to most of them, across tribal lands, another set of rights carried weight often ignored. Many tribes held senior claims recognized on paper, but pipes and pumps never caught up. Households hauled water in barrels, while cities downstream bargained acre-feet like chips. As shortage tiers deepened, tribal leverage rose. Negotiations shifted tone, leases in exchange for infrastructure to finally bring running water home. Back on the plains, use it or lose it still walked behavior, but people began testing the edges. One irrigation district piloted use it and bank it, crediting conserved water to a ledger that couldn't be grabbed by the next guy. It was a small rebellion against a century-old incentive to waste. It worked in that place, that year. The politics were harder than the plumbing. Meanwhile, federal studies set the next season's posture. The 24-month study out of reclamation projected Lake Mead staying in shortage and Lake Powell releasing a mid-elevation volume 48 million acre-feet to balance grim inflows and legal obligations. On paper, it penciled. On water, it pinched. Micro-story, Marina. At Lake Powell, a foreman moved dock anchors again, chasing the shrinking shoreline. Houseboats creaked on mud. A ranger measured the drop against a bolt on a piling and made a note. The note became a dataset. The dataset became a meeting. Paperwater had built subdivisions, dairies, and expectations. Wetwater was writing a new script, line by line, in elevation marks and pump curves. The buffers had blinked red. Underground, the fuse hissed louder. The Ogallala's vanishing bank account. While the river lawyers argued over tiers and triggers, the High Plains watched numbers on well logs turn from tolerable to terminal. Recharge here isn't a season, it's a century. In parts of the southern Ogallala, new water trickles in like a leaky faucet, millimeters to inches a year. Meanwhile, pumps pull feet. A bank account that took geologic time to build is being burned through in a couple of human generations. County by county, the colors on the map shifted from pale to warning. In the Texas Panhandle, screens that once sat 10 feet below the water table now hung in air. Western Kansas lit up with hot zones along old buried channels where the aquifer had been thick and forgiving. Those streaks kept a few pivots alive longer, which only made the fall sharper when the bottom dropped. A farmer could harvest 200 bushel corn while the neighbor's pump screamed sand. Then the roles flipped. Luck felt like skill until it didn't. Stakes weren't abstract. They rode in cattle trucks and grain hoppers. A fifth of America's grain and beef machine leaned on this reservoir, feed corn, silage, finishing yards, packing plants. The chicken in a grocery rotisserie case had a High Plains story because the feed did. School lunches, food banks, export bins with names few of us ever see, tied to inches beneath fields most of us never will. Towns carried that weight. A single processing plant underwrote a school levy, a hardware store, a diner. If the wells slipped, the anchors dragged. Action arrived wrapped in local pride, self-regulation. Groundwater districts held meetings in gymnasiums and Masonic halls. Boards set target drawdowns, adopted reasonable use, and asked neighbors to believe that cutting now might keep kids here later. Meters got bolted on, allotments printed. In some places, the limits bit. In others, lines were drawn at what felt possible, not what geology demanded. 5 dry years in a row turned too little, too late from a warning into a description. Meanwhile, machines told the truth in metal. Pivots that used to draw 30 gallons a minute per foot started sucking air. Pressure gauges jittered. Variable frequency drives tripped alarms. Wells deepened, another length of steel, another invoice. Then a driller hit the base of the aquifer. There was nowhere else to go. In those zones, salt and nitrates crept up from older layers, pulled toward the void. The water that remained got harder to treat and more expensive to use. Impact hit balance sheets first. Land values wobbled. Fields with strong saturated thickness appraised like beachfront. Fields across the fence got priced like a house with a cracked foundation. Lenders developed a new bedside manner, friendly questions about water levels, then tighter terms, higher reserves, appraisals with footnotes that read declining reliability. Consolidation followed. Operations with cash and thicker water bought neighbors. The cafe's corkboard added 2 more for sale flyers. Micro-story, west of Garden City, the school board met to redraw bus routes. A feedlot cut half its pens after 3 wells tested marginal. 40 jobs gone. The superintendent laid out a map with longer loops to pick up kids who used to live closer in. A mom asked whether the marching band would still have uniforms. No one had an easy answer. The Booster Club scheduled a fundraiser and skipped the part where they used to irrigate the practice field. While that was happening, the spreadsheet that kept ag running got messy. Diesel costs rose because pumps ran longer to lift the same acre inch. Fertilizer bills climbed. A pivot that finished a circle in a day took two because the flow rate sagged. Insurers asked for water logs before they wrote policies. Bankers wanted a plan to switch to sorghum or dryland. Deficit irrigation, feeding the crop at the right growth stages and starving it when it could take it, worked in trials. In fields where the pump couldn't hit the timing, it didn't. Water quality turned into a health line item. Rural districts tested more and issued notices that sounded like boilerplate but mattered. Don't let infants drink this. Blending and treatment showed up as rate hikes. A rancher opened a bill and saw the line he used to ignore had doubled. He looked at a windbreak of dying cedars and wondered which cost more to lose, the trees or the water. Culture cracked in ways hard to chart. Potlucks thinned. Friday night rosters shrank. The volunteer fire department struggled to fill shifts because families moved to where taps worked and fields didn't hiss air at sunrise. Dust advisories arrived with wind forecasts. Bare fields, dry lake beds, and busted crusts put grit in the air and coughs in clinics. There were bright spots. A handful of counties implemented quotas with teeth, LEMA-style caps, meters reporting near real-time, compacts that spread pain on purpose. Crop rotations shifted, more sorghum and wheat, fewer thirsty corn acres, wells stabilized, yields steadied at a lower plateau. Towns that chose that path kept schools open and cafes busy. But even there, the climate clock asked for more inches when inches were the one thing you couldn't conjure. What nobody put on a sign at the county line was the truth that governed all of it. This wasn't a drought that ends with a good winter. This was a drawdown that only ends when people pump less than nature repays. The Ogallala's bank account has a balance, a ledger, and a slope. Communities are deciding, in public and in kitchens, which slope they can live with. Cities on borrowed time. While the high plains counted inches underground, desert cities kept betting on growth curves that assumed tomorrow's river would look like yesterday's. Phoenix, Las Vegas, and the Front Range had turned water portfolios into engines, carefully layered rights, reuse, storage credits, and political nerve. On paper, it looked resilient. Then model runs landed like verdicts. In Phoenix, a stack of groundwater simulations told a blunt story. Not enough assured supply to keep stamping cul-de-sacs on the map at the same speed. The state drew a circle in the far suburbs and said, pause, no new approvals that lean on stressed aquifers. A builder stared at a letter that didn't mention granite countertops or mountain views. It said insufficient groundwater. Curbs were poured. Model homes were staged. Sales signs said future phases pending. The air between those words carried the cost of a bet that didn't pencil. Phoenix's portfolio still had pillars, salt and verd rivers, a straw to the Colorado, and banked groundwater credits. But assured stopped sounding like forever when the Bureau's 24-month study projected Lake Mead locked in a level 1 shortage for 2025, and Lake Powell stuck in a mid-elevation release Tier 7, 48 million acre-feet leaving Glen Canyon, elevation lines still below comfort. The 1,075-foot trigger wasn't a rumor, it was a line the reservoir crossed and stayed below. Arizona and Nevada ate cuts. California leaned on senior rights and side deals. The city finance office translated it: higher risk, higher cost, fewer easy options. Las Vegas had already treated conservation like identity. Reuse turned flushes into credits. Turf bans ripped out front yards. Hotels tracked drops like accountants. A third intake tunneled through bedrock to chase a falling lake. It bought time. Meanwhile, Lake Mead hovered around a third full. Hydropower's head thinned. Hoover's older turbines lost efficiency until newer low-head units carried more weight. The kilowatt-hour price that once floated on cold, cheap water moved with gas and heat waves. A family in Henderson opened a bill, saw a surcharge tied to hydrologic conditions, and nudged the thermostat up. On Colorado's Front Range, Denver and fast-growing neighbors quilted portfolios, transmountain diversions, reservoir shares, junior rights on creeks that ran like they remembered a cooler century. HOAs fined brown lawns while water departments begged people to keep them. A university model flagged a cluster of alluvial wells sagging faster than expected. One city quietly halted annexations for 6 months and called bond analysts. The phrase exposure to long-term resource constraints slid into a report. Council members learned that 3 words can nudge an interest rate. Stakes weren't fountains and golf. They were mortgages priced on perpetual growth, municipal bonds backed by ratepayers, and pension funds tied to utility revenue. If new taps slow, cash curves bend. If new sources cost 5 times more, the bill lands in a mailbox. A water bill is a mare's tripwire. Action came in belt tightening and optics with receipts. Phoenix doubled leak patrols at night and fast-tracked purple pipe projects to irrigate parks and schools with reuse. Las Vegas pushed another tiered rate bracket onto the heaviest users and banned ornamental turf at offices with testimonials from landscapers who learned to make mesquite look like design, not defeat. The Front Range piloted neighborhood-scale reuse, laundry to landscape greywater, plumbed with code updates and purple tags. These weren't slogans, they were line items and fittings bought with rate hikes framed as resilience. Then a different letter hit planning desks. Pause on subdivisions tied to junior Colorado River rights. The city that had promised lawns reconsidered its covenant book. An HOA board fought over fines for dead grass and settled on desert plants by spring, no penalties if a plan was filed. In the parking lot, a man said, "We moved here for green," then stared at a photo of Lake Mead's white ring and didn't finish the sentence. Desalination arrived as a headline and a placeholder. A pitch for a pipeline from Mexico found gravity, energy, and politics stacked against it. A 200-mile straw from the Mississippi died under spreadsheets. Groundwater import schemes resurfaced by ranches, export water to cities, and met county commissions who could count votes. Engineers kept saying the quiet part, every new drop rides on watts and debt. Tribal nations shifted more than tone. Senior rights long recognized on paper began moving water and building pipes. One nation leased a slice to a nearby city in exchange for infrastructure that finally put running water in kitchens that had hauled barrels. A grandmother turned a tap and let it run an extra beat just to listen. In City Hall, a planner wrote partnership in a notebook and meant steel. The housing machine felt drag. A master-planned community froze mid-sentence. A credit rating watch listed long-term water exposure. Realtors learned to answer, "Where does this water come from?" with more than a smile. Data centers and chip fabs put water balance on their site selection slide decks beside megawatts and tax abatements. One paused plans, one picked a wetter state. The brochure didn't mention that part. Micro-story, at a council meeting, a football coach set a section of purple pipe on the dais and said, "This keeps Friday nights." The city had plumbed the school fields to reuse, filters, pumps, a separate meter. The kids ran gases under lights powered by a grid, a little less buoyed by Hoover and a little more by peakers. In the bleachers, grandparents cheered. They didn't need the memo to know the color meant saved inches. Politics moved with necessity. A commissioner who ran on no state overreach asked for stricter rules because those rules gave cover to say no to subdivisions that would bankrupt the utility later. A mayor held up leak statistics and turf rebate numbers for cameras and came back to a federal letter about deeper shortage tiers if Mead slipped toward 1,050 feet. Staff pulled up the 24-month study and wrote contingency plans with fewer adjectives. The hidden bill arrived with a smile graphic, rate increases to fund reuse, leak hunts, and deferred maintenance. A family on a fixed income did math. The park spray pad was closed. The sign said water conservation in effect. Kids kicked a soccer ball on a field that had learned to be green on recycled drops. Cities had marketed certainty. The river and the aquifer wrote in elevation and inches. Borrowed time runs out when interest compounds faster than deposits. The countdown that started under fields had reached cul-de-sacs and culverts, and it spoke in the one language every city hears, cash. The hidden bill, energy, food, and power.